Welcome to Positive Disintegration, a path to authenticity. In this episode, we're talking to Caitlin Hughes from the Divergent Dialogues podcast, and we're talking about making sense of difference. So, disintegration around neurodivergent identity after identification, sensory and emotional ways of processing your things, and what happens when other people can't understand your ways of thinking and being in the world. This is really a conversation which hopes to depathologize difference and different ways of being. Hello listeners and welcome to Positive Disintegration. I'm Emma Nicholson.
I'm Chris Wells.
And Chris, today we've got a fellow Aussie on the podcast. I'm very excited.
I'm excited too, although I'm not an Aussie, but yes, I can't wait to have you two bringing your Australianness to our listeners.
You're going to be the one with the odd accent today.
That's right.
Although you're not going to be odd in the fact that we're going to be talking about neurodivergence, which I think is something that we can all relate to.
Agreed.
So for our listeners, our guest today is Caitlin Hughes. Caitlin is an accredited mental health social worker and founder of Cathartic Collaborations, a neurodivergent-affirming private practice based in Brisbane here in Australia. Caitlin uses their intersectional lived experience to therapeutically support neurocomplex and neuroqueer folks. They use somatic therapeutic modalities to support clients to heal systemic trauma and embrace their unique neurotype, strengths and differences, empowering them to build a self-defined life of meaning and purpose. Caitlin has a Facebook group called Neurodivergent-affirming Social Workers Collective, where they want to inspire and support other social workers to grow their neurodivergent-affirming practice. Caitlin is also co-host of a podcast, Divergent Dialogues, a neurodivergent-affirming podcast and blog on Substack, which explores a blend of current research and professional experience. Caitlin is currently completing a PhD with a strong interest in qualitative research in the area of autistic mental health. Welcome to the podcast, Caitlin.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you with us. And I just listening to your bio, I'm like, where to begin? For one thing, I love that you started that group for social workers because I'm a social worker too. I feel like there's so much conversation with other areas other than social work. And so I love that. And I haven't been very active there, but I hope to be eventually when I have capacity for it.
Yeah. It was tricky to write the bio because I very much view myself as a multi-potentialite and I just end up doing all these things at once. And I was having a clinical supervision with my current supervisor and I was telling her about all the things that I was doing and I wanted to do. And she was like, Caitlin, you are literally insane because of all the things that you do. And I'm like, you're not wrong. But yeah, I guess it's what helps to keep my brain happy. And yeah, I agree, Chris, in regards to the Facebook group that I started. I'm not sure what it's like so much in the US, but I guess in Australia, there does tend to be a lot of focus in the neurodivergent space, on psychology and OT, and they do an awesome job and, they're wonderful in their way. But I guess I would like to carve out a space for social work in that space as well.
I'm so glad that you did. Yeah, it's important. I do feel and here it's psychology or counselors. There's a lot of counselors in the spaces I'm in, but not so much with social work. And and the people I went to school with for social work, I feel kind of disconnected with them at this point because I got my master's degree in 2008 and then went into psychology for my PhD, but not clinical. And so it was funny I thought that by the end of that, I was ready to go back to social work just because it's my preference. Social work has more of an anti-oppressive social justice framing that for me really resonates compared to psychology.
Yeah, I just find in regards to the neurodivergent affirming movement and, on social media, there's a lot of discussion around how a lot of the, the underlying principles of neurodivergent affirming practice, it's about kind of embracing people how they are and not pathologizing them, and kind of looking from that anti-oppressive and intersectional lens, because particularly for autistic folks and ADHDs, there tends to be a lot of, intersectional experience with like sexuality and gender. And I just chuckle a little bit because I'm like, oh, social workers, we've been working from these lenses for a really long time. But I think a lot of us, I think social work, it tends to attract a certain kind of person who's quite humble and maybe not kind of willing to go out there and promote themselves. So I think, there's so many social workers out there doing an amazing job in this space. And I was hoping to kind of bring people together.
Well done. I'm torn because part of me wants to say something about you guys being Australian and your accents, because I know that you, like, I don't understand the bogan thing. Emma said it, you've said it. So I don't know if we go there first or if we ask you how you found the theory first.
Let's go for the bogan. I love it.
Yeah, go ahead. Like, explain that to me, please.
All right. So bogan, it's the Australian equivalent of the American white trash, I guess, without the white part. It sort of denotes anyone that sort of comes from, I guess, a lower class. It's someone who's basically, uncivilized in a way, and normally people from the outer suburbs of metropolitan areas. So it's not the same thing as someone who's rural or from the country, like, a bumpkin or a redneck. It's really someone who's from, I guess, the more ghetto, wrong side of the tracks, suburbs, and we have a particular way of speaking that really Caitlin and I don't particularly have, I suppose, through work and other things. We tend to try and move that accent out, but I can tell you, my inner monologue still speaks in a very thick bogan accent.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people internationally tend to love the Australian accent. Like whenever, when I went over to Europe, everyone's like, wow, are you an Aussie? And I'm like, yeah. Or sometimes you might get mistaken to be from New Zealand. But I don't know. It's just, I guess for myself, especially in those academic and professional spaces, you kind of feel judged unless you have this kind of really refined kind of proper voice. So I do think, like, when I'm with my family, we kind of you just don't pronounce words. You just kind of, but in these sorts of situations, like, I do, like, unconsciously talk differently so that it's a lot clearer.
Yeah, the interviews that you see with, like, the Chris Hemsworths and the Russell Crowes, their version of Australian is more that polished, refined, very conscious, trying to not sound bogan, whereas when we're sort of alone together, little groups of Aussies, we run our words together. We use a lot of contractions, we use a lot of slang, and we diphthong or bend our vowels a lot.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel like I understand now much better than I did before, and that totally makes sense. Interesting.
I can assure you that there would be ways Caitlin and I could talk together, which you would be like, is that even English? Like,
well, I want to hear that.
We're both too embarrassed to do it. This is the problem. We're very self-conscious about our accent.
It's so weird.
Okay, well, you don't have to.
It's so funny because I didn't actually realize how self-conscious I was of it until there was one episode when you were both talking about it, your voices and feeling self-conscious. And then, when I started my podcast and just listening to yourself back, and you're just like cringing inside, being like, oh my gosh, I sound so like silly. But it's funny, the more episodes I've recorded, because my partner will listen to them, I'm like, oh, this is actually all right. Like, I don't mind this.
Well, I love your accents. I still remember the moment at the Congress last month when Dominic was presenting, and I thought to myself, I could listen to him talk all day. Like, what an amazing accent he has.
Yeah, I think I'm very much drawn to unique and different. So yeah, I quite enjoy listening to other people's accents. Just not my own.
Same.
Okay, well, now we have the accent thing handled, check. Yeah, please, Caitlin, tell us how you first learned about the theory.
I was actually thinking I've been thinking about this for a really long time, because I came to the Positive Disintegration podcast, I think it was about a year ago. Maybe I think it was about October last year. And I was in this really challenging spot in my life because I didn't realize it at the time, but I was going through this massive grief basically for my whole life, because earlier that year, I was late diagnosed autistic and ADHD. And like, this was even before I knew that I was gifted. And I was just sitting in this grief and trying to process basically this backlog of all these things that have happened in my life. Because for me, when I understand another aspect of myself, I literally go like to the start and just go through my whole life and try and go, okay, well, now that we've got this piece of information, what does this mean now? What does this look like? Or how do I perceive this now? Which probably isn't a very efficient way of going about things, but I guess that's just my process. And yeah, I was feeling quite defeated, quite broken. I was really struggling with coming to terms with, I'd always had these experiences my whole life. Like, I'd always been autistic and I've always been an ADHDer, but it's like it burst this bubble. And something that a lot of people tend to experience after identification or diagnosis is this like skill regression. And essentially it's because you've just ignored your needs for so long. And I work with a lot of people who are late diagnosed and identified. And essentially what happens is they go through this massive burnout because their body and their brain is just like, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this. We can't continue to ignore our needs. So anyway, I digress. Yeah, so I was in this really challenging frame of mind, and I was, as you are when you're burnt out, you're doom scrolling on social media. And I came across an influencer who was talking about giftedness and positive disintegration. And it was really interesting because I'd seen some of these videos before, but it was just like, one of those moments where it's like you're in the right space to hear the message. Like, you've seen it so many times, but it hasn't quite clicked. And I think it was just, I guess that was the time. And then I started listening to your podcast, and I was just like, my mind was absolutely blown because it helped to explain a lot of these, I guess, cycles and experiences that I've had throughout my whole life. And it really helped to, although I was aware of, the neurodivergent-affirming movement and I worked from that framework, I just felt that, there's a lot of focus around like autism and ADHD, but I think some of the more stigmatized diagnostic labels, a lot of that's not really talked about. And I think as both of you shared your experiences and, talked about some of those more challenging, aspects of mental health, it really helped probably for the first time to stop pathologizing myself and to really look at this internalized ableism that I had been experiencing my whole life. I was really grateful to find the podcast when I did, because it was like this big moment for me.
That's amazing. And just listening to you hear that, I just had like flashes of, I feel like even over the past year, I've been able to finally think of myself as autistic too, and not just an ADHDer. Like PDA made sense to me. Then the more I realized that I guess accepting PDA helped open the door for me to accepting autism too, because it's like a different type of being autistic, which resonated with me more than, I guess, like traditional autism. And so I guess I wonder about these combinations, AuDHD, PDA or not. It just makes more sense to me. And like, so just in the time that I've known you, like your work has now had an influence on me. And I love that because I'm sure that's how I got to know you, through Substack. That was like the connection that we had. And so I just knew right away, once I started seeing your podcast episodes, I was like, oh, yes. And I would listen and they're short, which is easy for me. And so, yeah, like it's just fascinating for me to think too, like how the people that come to the theory thanks to us also have an influence on me. And it's like, it really is this kind of circular, or we influence each other, and it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. And I think, yeah, it's just, I was actually thinking this morning, I guess I've been thinking about recording this episode with the both of you for so long. And I'm like, was starting my podcast an elaborate plan in order for this to happen? Not necessarily on a conscious level, on a subconscious level. I'm like, wow, maybe it was.
Good. I'm glad you did. No, it's very flattering. If this is all elaborate plan just to be on the podcast, then it's extremely flattering, and my ego has been boosted. But I'm sure it's not, because your own podcast has obviously its own value, and as Chris said, it's good that you are sort of starting these groups for social workers and stuff. So that's really excited. But I wanted to touch on something that you said about going back through your life and viewing it through a new lens. And I think it's perfectly, I had to use the word normal, but it's perfectly normal for that realization to prompt you to go back and look at your life. Even when you find out about positive disintegration or overexcitabilities or whatever it is, you go back and say, oh, where's all the things that never made sense to me before that I can make sense of now? I know Katie Higgins-Lee talks about this a lot, that those sorts of neurodivergent identities can in fact cause a kind of disintegration of your previous identity and get you to revisit it. So I think that's like a very reasonable experience, because I know part of what happened to me was I'm like, maybe I should stop smoking weed to find out who this person is underneath and see what happens with my overexcitabilities when I stop putting all those things in place and I stop trying to mask it. So when you were talking about like a skill regression, I'm like, that actually kind of sounds familiar, because there's a point where I'm like, you know what, if I just like let myself go free range for a while and just see what happens, let's find out who we really are under all these like coping strategies and all that other stuff. So it makes perfect sense.
There's this lyric that has been popping into my head, and it's Bring Me the Horizon. I don't know if you know the band. Yep. And I feel like these two words sum up how positive disintegration has played out in my life. And I have it on my work computer, and I see it every single day. And what it is before the truth will set you free, it will piss you off. Before you find a place to be, you're going to lose the plot. And I think for me, that really, really sums it up, because, when you come to these realizations about yourself, you have to look at yourself with honesty. And a lot of the times you don't want to necessarily take on board some of this feedback from others, from yourself. Like, it's hard to be real with yourself. And I think something that I have come to understand about myself over the last year is that I thought that a lot of the work that I had to do was about forgiving others. And I realized it was actually more about forgiving myself and having a positive relationship with myself, because if I don't like myself, how can I like anything? Because I'm just going to be viewing the whole world with this dark lens. So yeah, there have been times where I have, especially I identify as a PDA, and there are times where I'm like, no, like I don't want to interact with that perception or reality. I'm just going to ignore that. But what I found with life is that it just keeps shoving it in your face until you finally acknowledge it in various ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's totally like going back, once you have answers, even if they're hard to accept at first, like when you're late identified and you have to go through this grief process of being like, shit, I've gone all of these years without understanding myself. But I think that that's the beauty of positive disintegration for the people who find us, is it's like, okay, well, yeah, so you get the late diagnoses, now that you're autistic and an ADHD, but like then we're like, well, here's this framework that lets you understand yourself like without pathologizing yourself. And I think like that was what I didn't realize I needed so much, which I got thanks to studying the theory and applying it, was I realize now like the depth of the self-loathing that I used to have. I just absolutely hated myself. And what makes me sad is I think about like my son's early years before I came to the theory and went through all of this, and how much I was like shutting him down a bit because I was like, oh, don't be like that. Oh, like society won't accept you if you're this way, and trying to like fit him into like the normal box. And then one day realizing like, why am I expecting him to be normal? Like, have I looked in the mirror? And just like all of these realizations and so much, like he just asked me last week because, we're in the process of moving. And so there's all this stuff around from the past and whatever. And he was like, well, how did you come to the theory anyway? And I said, well, because I was trying to figure out what was going on with you. And so I had to understand what was going on with me, because in order for you to make sense, like I had to make some sense. And so it was that kind of process of trying to figure us both out. And that's when I found it. And I think it was cool for him to realize in that moment, like, oh, wow, like, so all of this happened because of that. Because like, I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, you were a mystery, but I was like a mystery to myself too. And so, I think that people who are typically developing may not realize how hard it is to figure out your life when you're multiply exceptional. That's a weird thing to say, but when you have multiple exceptionalities, giftedness, autism, ADHD, PDA, like that's a lot to figure out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, especially when you're multi-exceptional, there's this weird paradox where it's like, I can do these amazing things, particularly intellectually. Give me an intellectual pursuit, I can do it. But then it's like, I struggle to wash my hair, or I struggle to just do these basic adulting things, or, even like being inconsistent. So like I look back at school, or like if you look at my academic transcript in my bachelor degree, it's like a roller coaster, my grades, because, we, as a neurodivergent person, our capacity fluctuates. So like some days I'm on all cylinders, and other days it's a really big struggle just to do the most basic of things. So it's kind of, I think particularly for a lot of multi-exceptional folks, is you've got to kind of reconcile that, because I guess a lot of people internalize these narratives of I'm lazy, I'm a failure, I'm a flake. And then when someone presents you with, hey, I think, you may be gifted, they're like, no, there's no way that I could be gifted. Look at this pile of stuff that I can't do. That can't be true.
Yes. And especially because people equate giftedness with achievement. And so they don't even understand that it's a legitimate experience, in itself, like beyond what you do on a test or in a classroom.
But there's a lot of messages around that. Like when I was in school, couldn't math for shit. And it's only recently that I even like came across the term dyscalculia, right? Couldn't math. And everyone's like, but you're so smart and everything else. Like you can do, like I could do chemistry and physics because it had context around it, but I couldn't do mathematics because it was too abstract. It was just like numbers and just did not make any sense whatsoever. So, well, why can you do these things, but you can't do that? And it's those little comments that start to build that narrative within you. Okay, you're good at everything else. Why can't you just sit down and pay attention? Like, you're so well behaved, but why do I always get reports from your teachers saying that you can't shut up and you always talk to the other students and you can't sit still? Like, but those are the things. And then part of that is you then expend so much energy trying to control those aspects of yourself. Like, it becomes really exhausting. And I don't think some people realize when, particularly if they don't know about this stuff, back in our day when we were young and nobody knew about neurodivergence, right? When they don't know, they don't realize they're putting this pressure on you and how much extra work that you're doing in order to maintain and stay on top of it and do the adulting stuff, like particularly. And I think that's part of the grief process, is how much energy did I spend just trying to pretend to be normal, How exhausting was it?
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the masking, the demand of masking in the pursuit of being normal, which I think is normal is highly subjective anyway. But it's just, it's really hard to reconcile. And I think there's been this really unfortunate perspective that, if we apply pressure to people, then it's, we're going to, I guess, push people to be better. But the thing is, when you apply pressure, you can create diamonds, but you can also create granite. and diamonds are really tough. Granite is not. It's, and even if we have the best of intentions to kind of support people to be the best person, it's actually how the message is received that really matters, because outwardly you can be highly performing, but internally you can be completely crumbling. So like on the outside you look like a diamond, but on the inside you're granite. And it's just not a sustainable way to live, because eventually, as I said, I work with a lot of late identified diagnosed folks. Like it's usually like late 20s. For some people, it might be in their 30s or their 40s, but there's some point where they just can't do it anymore and they burn out, and all this stuff just kind of spills out of them and this grief process happens.
Tina Harlow has a similar, like for her, she talks about like, she uses trees as her analogy. So like the difference between like conifers and aspens. And so like conifers, they're not like, I don't feel like I can do it justice, so maybe forget it. But like aspens, they're like more high maintenance, I guess, or like they're more difficult. Like they only grow in certain places, whereas the conifers are everywhere here. So you see them everywhere. They can grow in any conditions, but not the aspens. They're more temperamental, I guess. And so maybe we won't leave this in, but yeah, I love these ways of viewing this stuff. And I remember though, like going to a restaurant with Tina of where she lives and looking out, and there was like this tree that it was like both a conifer and an aspen, like they had grown together. And I was like, well, what's that? That's like the twice exceptional tree. So now, like, I feel like I would like to guide you to talk about sensual giftedness if you're up for it, because
yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Tina. Yeah, I was quite inspired by Tina's presentation at the Dabrowski Congress this year. And, I think, it comes back to, these different experiences that people might have that might be highly pathologized. And I had an assessment with Intergifted, at the beginning of this year. And I guess they have their own model of giftedness, and there's other aspects, and don't ask me to remember them all right now because my brain won't. But, there's a lot of focus on intellectual giftedness, and I really enjoy Intergifted's model because it is more holistic and it's looking at the whole person. And I looked at the sensual giftedness, and I had no idea what that was. And when I had my assessment, my sensual giftedness was actually my highest domain of giftedness. And it was really this other moment where, particularly in the context of autism, sensory differences are seen as a deficit. And I'm not going to say that, my sensory experiences aren't overwhelming, because they can be really overwhelming to me. I'm very sensitive to essentially all of my senses, and I perceive information sensorily that a lot of people just don't. And I think there's been this long history of people having these experiences and essentially being told that they're crazy, because it's like, well, we can't see it. I can't perceive it. So you must just be crazy. And I think there's probably a long line. And I even look back because I used to work for Queensland Health, which is our state health system. And I just look back at all these folks that, were provided with all these diagnoses like schizophrenia and psychosis and bipolar. And I honestly think a lot of them may have been autistic. And I think a lot of them may have had these like sensory differences and perceived things and information that others didn't. And I think when you have a history of complex trauma and you also have these sensory perception differences, I think that it can, I guess, change how you experience the processing and the living of that trauma.
I agree. It's so interesting. I think about that a lot in terms of my experiences with people in the hospital. You know, I wrote a lot when I was hospitalized when I was younger about the people that I got to know in the hospital. And I've thought of so many people who were diagnosed with schizophrenia who I think are probably really autistic. You know, the things that they were experiencing it was seen as psychosis, but I believe that it's similar to what you're saying. That's just something, I don't know, it's like in my mind from people that I've known.
You know, I guess as I said, I didn't have a lot of these understandings about myself until very recently, only like 2 years ago. And when you're a young person and, you know, a lot of autistic people can be quite vulnerable and, you know, we can kind of be quite people pleasery and feel quite anxious in social situations. And, you know, when you have people in positions of power tell you and label your experiences for you, you kind of don't question it. And they go, okay, well, you know, this person's been to university for a really long time. They must know what they're talking about. And I trust that, you know, what they're saying is correct. And I'm not necessarily going to question that. And I have no animosity towards them because, I mean, I've been there. You know, I've had my trainings and I look back before all of my understanding around neuroaffirming practice and theory of positive disintegration. I go, oh my gosh, like, have I done like harm to these people? Or like, I'm so sorry. I look back at all these people. I'm like, oh my goodness, like you're autistic. Like that's why we're trying all these treatment modalities and they weren't fitting for you. And yeah, so I guess when I was 20, I had this experience where essentially I had experienced a lot of trauma in my life. And I think in order to cope with that, I had to really disconnect from my body and my surroundings and really shut down, you know, that sensory perception that I had because I didn't know how to cope with it at the time. And there was a lot of things going on. And I had an experience where essentially I guess, protection that I had, that defense mechanism that I had created for myself, it just burst. And then everything just kind of spilled out of my mind, I guess, essentially. It was just everything at once. And particularly through my recent trauma healing over the last few years, something that I've come to understand is that for me to process trauma intellectually is very challenging because my intellect was something that I used as a coping mechanism for a really long time. And I think emotionally, I'm starting to really connect to that within myself. But really, the magic that I found is when I'm leaning into processing these challenging experiences through my senses. And I think when we're pathologizing these experiences, it creates a problem where your body is trying to process something and then you're afraid of that processing because people are telling you that that's crazy or pathologizing it. But what I realized is when I was more open and accepting to what was happening, I was fine. It was fine. And I was able to actually work through that and process that and move forward. So to sum it up, what I want to say is that we need to be really careful on how we label people's experiences, because really what we should be doing is supporting people to define their own experience for themselves. And we shouldn't be creating fear, because essentially what happened when I was 20 years old is I was told I couldn't trust my own brain. I couldn't trust myself. And you can't get away from your brain. You can't get away from yourself. And if you don't even trust yourself, how can you trust anyone, the world, anything?
First, yes. Oh my gosh. Like, I couldn't relate more to being in my 20s and not trusting myself because I was told I was mentally ill, and in my case, it was bipolar. And I started thinking, it was like a constant for the next, who even knows how many years of like worrying about the next episode. Can you tell us more about your experience, like processing through your senses and what that looked like for you?
It's hard to explain. It's really hard to explain. It's kind of like you have to experience it to understand it, but I'll try. So, okay, I'll give you an example. So when it comes to my emotions, like, I'm really good at tapping into other people's emotional states. So I very much think that that's part of my sensual giftedness, is that I'm very attuned to other people's nervous systems, essentially, and their emotional state. And that's something that I didn't realize I was using in my work this whole time, and is probably part of why a lot of my clients feel very seen by me. Which is awesome. Yes. So I think because of a lot of the trauma that I had experienced, I got into this space where I was very focused externally. And I think that I had grown some of these skills without even realizing it, but I hadn't done that internal work. So for me to tune into my emotional state, it's getting a lot better, but sometimes can be quite challenging. So what will happen is I'll just have these sorts of feelings. I'm like, what's going on? And then I'll have like a song, and there's this song, it'll just play over and over and over and over in my mind until it drives me crazy. And then I'm like, okay, and I'll go read the lyrics. And the lyrics, it's literally like showing me exactly what my experience is. And most people would go, oh, well, because I think, what's it called? It's like an earworm or whatever. But it's like, I haven't heard the song. I hadn't heard this. Like, it's not like I don't listen to the radio. I mostly listen to podcasts. Like, I haven't heard this song. It's just like coming into my mind to help me to understand how I feel. When I've had more challenging experiences, like sometimes I can have, quite intense dreams. And I think I process a lot of things through my dreams. Sometimes I can have experiences where I guess perceive things visually that other people might not see. And again, like when I feared those things, it just got worse. Whereas now I just accept that that's part of my experience. And it just reminds me of when I was mid-20s. I used to facilitate a Hearing Voices group. I don't know if you've ever heard of, the Hearing Voices movement. And essentially, I guess the premise of that is that, typically it's people who've been labeled to have psychosis or schizophrenia, and essentially they're trying to take the power back and go, look, yes, we have these experiences, but they're not necessarily negative or bad. And this is actually just a part of our experience. And when we kind of band together and we, have that, sharing of those mutual experiences, it really helps to depathologize. And I remember we had a bunch of group programs, and it was the one, I'm not trying to like big note myself or anything here, I promise. But it was, we had the highest attendance. And I don't know if either of you have ever run groups, but it's really hard to maintain attendees. Like, you usually get a massive dropout. Yeah, we had high attendance. And my manager at the time was like, how are so many people coming? Like, what are you doing? And at the time I was like, I don't know. But I look back now and I'm like, it's because they could just turn up and be themselves and not be judged. And there's probably like nowhere else they could go where they had that experience.
Yeah, this is making me think of fragments of A Diary of a Madman, where Dabrowski talks as himself as both in terms of being schizophrenic and as a practitioner, and saying, I'm not sure which one helps the other more. Like, does being a practitioner help me understand my schizophrenic tendencies, or does living this experience help me as a practitioner? And you sort of saying it's really hard to know how to explain this. I mean, I can't imagine for most people having these unusual experiences, although I completely relate to the song thing, honestly. That haven't heard a song for years, all of a sudden it's repeating in my head, and then you go and listen to it or read the lyrics and go, oh, that's what my brain's trying to tell me. Right? But like trying to explain that thing to people who like don't have those experiences can be hard in and of itself. Like I relate to that, but I can't imagine how little sense it would make to someone who doesn't experience that. So I get how we've ended up in that place of pathology, because other people are just looking at you going, what? Where it's just a different way of processing.
And I think, like, obviously I'm like, this is my personal experience, and other people have their own interpretation of what it is for them. But, you know, there have been times where I've had, I call it commentary in my mind that has been quite negative. And what I've come to understand is that I feel like it's all of these internalized narratives that I've experienced, like you were talking about, Emma, from when you're really young, you know, from your parents, from your school, from your peers, you know, from social media, wherever. And I guess for me, it's, you know, I guess I have this really strong awareness of my mind, and I've, you know, hang out in there a lot. And yeah, so I think like some people may have a different interpretation, particularly if it's pathologized, and go, oh, well, these are negative thoughts, or, you know, I'm hearing voices, or like these are kind of command hallucinations. Like these are, you know, pathologized terms. But for me, I go, okay, well, this is a message from that I need to listen to. This isn't kind of nonsense. And I guess that, like, this was how I kind of conceptualized it. What was it? Sense making nonsense. Because often, like when I used to work for Queensland Health, like I worked with a lot of people who had, you know, a schizophrenia diagnosis or a psychosis. And basically they would assess whether or not they had these symptoms. But basically the way that the content of their experience was treated, it's like, oh, that's just all rubbish. Like, that's all nonsense. Like, there's no meaning in any of that. And it was quite interesting because I guess the way my brain works, I see patterns, and I would just see so many times these patterns of people who had these experiences of psychosis. And a lot of it was trauma, it was anxiety, it was fears, but they were coming out in this way that wasn't a usual experience for people. Like maybe it was just so much, or maybe they just had a propensity for this kind of experience where it just spills out. It's like, you know, your internal experience spills out into your external experience. I think sometimes there's a fear if people read into these things that really horrible, bad things are going to happen. And, you know, I have worked in forensic mental health, so I'm not going to go, okay, like if your brain is telling you to do something that's harmful to yourself or others, like I'm not saying, oh, let's listen to that and do that. There's definitely, I just want to preface that very strongly. That's not what I'm saying. But, you know, maybe if we're a little bit more curious around why people are having these experiences and not dismissing the content and going, okay, where is this coming from? Like it must come from somewhere. It's not just coming from nothing. And yeah, the more that I have invited these experiences with curiosity, the more I've been able to effectively process and integrate and learn from these experiences.
Okay, if we're talking about people who, you know, particularly in the realm of giftedness, right? No wonder Dabrowski was talking about B-graded psychoneurotics, right? And like seeing people as having almost schizophrenic tendencies, because Okay, when you're out in the world and you're trying to solve some sort of problem and your brain's making connections between things that other people can't see, and you're solving a problem and it's in the realm of some sort of achievement or academic success, it's brilliant. It's fantastic, right? When you're thinking in analogies and you see symbolism and themes that other people can't see, you're a freaking genius. But if that same process happens internally to you, you think you're going mad. And then you try and explain that fucking nonsense to someone else. They couldn't see the connections and the dots if you were doing it with something externally that was right in front of their face. They're certainly not going to see the connections and the dots of all the things that are happening inside your own head because they can't see anything of that. And you explain it and just goes blah, falls on deaf ears and they go, whoa, you're a nutcase. But when these connections happen internally and you're using it to work on yourself and process your own things and you're in the privacy of your own journal, it works completely. But the minute you try and share that experience with someone else, you're a fucking mental patient. But it's the same connective thing that's happening. It's not going to make sense to other people because if it did, everybody would be like solving the impossible puzzles in the external world or seeing the hidden meaning in an artwork or whatever else it is that, your gifted brain can do. But of course they're not thinking that way. So when you try to explain a hidden internal process, of course they're going to think you're a fucking nutbag.
Yes. And the thing is that I think, oh gosh, there's so many things I could say, but it's like, I guess it is. It's your own like Rubik's Cube, or probably a bit more complicated than Rubik's Cube. I can't think of an example right now. Maybe one of those, those like super elaborate puzzle box things that I personally can never figure out. That's clearly not my gifted strength there. But I guess that's the point, is that it's your personal puzzle to figure out. And as a therapist, I can support someone to figure that out, but I can't tell them the answer to their own puzzle. Like I can, support them to see that they have the skills and the strengths and give them strategies to figure out how to figure out that puzzle. But I can't define someone else's experience for themselves. They have to do that themselves. And that's hard. But yeah, and I guess the other aspect was that, we do live in a capitalist society, and it's true. Like if something is seen to have monetary value or to be productive, then that's all good. Like, if someone is gifted and incredibly different in the way they go about things, but they're making money, they're making changes, it's great for other people. Awesome. But, when they want to talk about their existential conundrums, then no, we don't want to hear that. That's too depressing.
Like this is where the unilevel and multi-level distinction is so important in the theory, because like I think the unilevel aspect, because I feel like when I was younger, it was so much like you're saying, where I was having these experiences that I was pathologizing myself and then bringing to a psychiatrist and like basically asking them to pathologize for me and give me something to resolve it. And it was like, it was so outside of my awareness. And part of it was like somatic for me. And I realize now that, like, of course it was somatic. I mean, I too am so emotional and I have this emotional connection with other people. And so I didn't realize that. I didn't know I had it. And I didn't realize I was taking in other people's energy and emotions, and I didn't know the difference between theirs and mine. And I wasn't connected with mine. I had to disconnect from it because of the circumstances of my life in some ways. I was living with my father who was dying from alcohol use and stuff. And so all of these things were conspiring because like I didn't have the self-awareness. I didn't have the ability to even be aware. And like my multi-level journey of coming out of the unilevel disintegration was gaining self-awareness, which was so hard won. Of course, I was writing a journal. I was doing my best to understand what was happening with me, but it took forever because your mind, or my mind, has so many protections against me seeing reality clearly that it was thwarting me. And so it was like this decades-long journey of really understanding who I was, what I was capable of, like that it wasn't a problem or something to be pathologized. I mean, that whole journey was a lot. But it's interesting because, you said that like it was Tina's presentation that kind of gave you the idea to talk about this with us today. And part of the conversation that I have had with Tina and other people is this same thing of like, sometimes we're getting messages. I mean, I talked with Tina about this when she was here after, like as part of her journey, like she talked in her session at the Congress about like coming here after being in the hospital. And it was tough to figure out like how to help her. Like you said, like when you're talking with someone, like you can't solve the puzzle for someone else. You can only support them on their journey and through it. And so I had to try and figure out how to point out like, these are the messages. It's outside of your awareness right now. So this is like a unilevel part of your disintegration. Here are the multi-level aspects of your disintegration. And being able to be like a guide on her path during that time, I think helped, because I was able to like shed light on the fact that it's not clear cut. It's not just even one kind of disintegration necessarily. Some aspects of it are like hidden from you, but they come out like, in her story, like she talked about like, being in the emergency room and like turning the pillowcases like inside out and opening all the cabinets. And it's like, yes, that was you trying to say like, no, we have to look at what's inside. Like we have to see like the real message here. And, and like how she was giving gratitude to everything. And it was like, she needed to learn how to like be thankful even for herself and for all of this. And like, there was just so much to it. But I think like one of the problems with the theory is that, people think about it in kind of reductionist terms, like, well, you either have like a disintegration one way or the other, but it's so messy in reality. And those of us who work with people or who have really spent a lot of time understanding ourselves know how complex it is. And especially with gifted people, you can't expect other people to be able to see the connections and see what you're seeing. You just have to hope that you have somebody who can be like a true guide on your path and help you figure it out for yourself, because that's the real answer. But whoa, like getting there is a lot.
And yeah, it is really messy, because I think when I first came to, the theory and looking at the uni level and the multi-level and trying to kind of figure it out and see how it fit with me. And I think at first I did get a bit confused, because I'm like, what? So we just kind of go through this linear thing. And I'm like, that's definitely not my experience of my life whatsoever. And, yeah, I guess for me, because I've had so many really challenging experiences throughout my life, like I do think that there's probably aspects of myself that are kind of in that multi-level space. But every once in a while, I come up against a part of myself that's probably still in that uni level space. And I need to kind of work on that and heal that. So I don't know, maybe one day I'll kind of get all there. But I don't know, like I guess for me, it's less about a destination and more about just exploring what is. And, hopefully through my journey of understanding myself, I can support other people to understand themselves a lot more. And honestly, when I was like a teenager and in my early 20s, I didn't even think that I would be here, to be honest. I really didn't think I would. And there's no way, like if someone came to me when I was like 20 years old and said, Caitlin, when you're in your 30s, this is what your life's going to look like, I wouldn't have believed them. I want to support people that are in that space to give them hope and go, look, it's going to be hard work, but you can get there. You can get where you want to go, and you don't have to do it alone. You can reach out and get support. But also you do kind of have to define your own, make sense and make meaning for yourself in the end. And I think a lot of the times where, life has been really challenging. And again, I said before that I felt like a lot of my healing would be about forgiving others. But the more and more I go, Caitlin, the only person that's in your way is you. So you need to like get the heck out of your own way. Yeah, I guess I'm really grateful for your podcast and to you, Chris and Emma, because I feel like, I guess you were those voices that I really needed to hear in that really challenging time. And I think it's great that through your podcast, you've made this great community of people who are collectively going through these experiences, and hopefully we can like connect and inspire other people who, kind of get them on board with, I guess, the way that we view ourselves and view the world.
I'm glad that we were able to do that. And it still blows my mind to hear it, but thank you. And I'm so glad that you're here and we're having this conversation now. And I think that one of the greatest things about doing the podcast has been getting to know people and, and hearing about the impact that it has on other people to learn about the theory and this like different framework for understanding. And, but I just want to say quickly though, too, I too, when I was a teenager, I didn't expect to live past like my early 20s, maybe max. Like I expected to either die by suicide or drugs or whatever. Like I did not ever think that I would be a middle-aged person. So it's kind of amazing. I too would not have believed it. If you had told me when I was a teenager that I would be doing this now, and especially that I would be talking about this alternative to the pathology paradigm, I would be like, yeah, right. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor for one thing, which was an unrealistic kind of dream for me at the time. But no, I wouldn't have believed that I would be doing this.
When I really think about what I guess led me through all of that, I thought it was my intellect, and I do think it was part of it, but I think it was my curiosity, because I always want to know what comes next. No matter, it's like when you're watching a horror movie and you're so scared, but you still want to know, you keep watching and you want to know. And I think, that's why we just have to stay curious about ourselves and others and the world. And things suck. I'm not going to say they're not, and life's hard and the world can be really challenging. But, if we're curious and we're open, there are alternatives. And, things, when you're in that space, it can be really hard to see past, yourself or very far. But things change in big ways. And, you have these moments in life, these kind of sliding door moments. And yeah, I think for me, coming to the theory was one of those moments that really kind of changed the trajectory of, how I guess my headspace at the time and what I was doing with my life.
This is making me think about why the theory is so important. And when I was writing stuff about it and sending notes to Michael, he kept saying, you've got to express what an emotional experience this is. It's it is this messy, psychoneurotic, crazy conspiracy theory, red spider web diagrammy kind of I feel like I'm going completely mental kind of experience. But I think that's where our intellect can come in, because when we have a framework and we have means to make sense of the importance of why this is happening, of why it's happening, of how it's happening. And that's where, intellectual and emotional kind of need to go hand in hand, because the emotional is almost like the engine that's driving everything, but the intellect is the steering wheel and the windscreen that allows you to see exactly where that engine can take you.
It's since my trauma healing, what I've really noticed is that when I make choices from the headspace, it's really challenging, and it's, I'm hoping it will shift, but tends to be a lot of anxiety there. But when I make decisions from that kind of emotional heart space, it just feels right. There's no fear, there's no stress. It's just yep, that's it. But yeah, unfortunately, when you have been through a lot of trauma, it gets really blocked and it's hard to access.
But agreed. Same for me, where when my heart and intuition are driving, I feel so confident now and so grounded. And if I go away from that, totally different. And yeah, but when I was young, I was so cut off from my emotions and just was in my head. It was a disaster.
The thing that I've learned to do is allow my heart to make choices, but then allow my intellect to explore why my heart wanted to make that choice, so I understand it. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just acting on whims or doing things without anything. But that's how. So it's heart, what do you want to do? Okay, mind. Now let's understand why heart made that choice, and then we're a bit of a happy family.
Often we're told, you have to make choices with your head. Don't listen to your emotions. don't listen to this sensory input information that you're getting that other people can't perceive. Don't listen to that. It's not tangible. We just have to kind of sit in that cognitive space. And really, we want to be integrating those things and using all of those lenses and aspects to kind of move forward. And I can attest 100% just leading your life from the cognitive space, it only gets you so far.
True. It all has to be integrated.
I tried to make sense of my brain using like an office model, like a hierarchy of like personas that work in an office. So for me, I've like my senses are my data analytics team and my heart is my people leader and the CEO is the intellect, right? So when you're talking about that whole sensory processing thing, like my senses are feeding in all these little snippets of song lyrics and all these other things, and they're collecting all this data and they send it through to the heart. It's actually the heart's job to make the recommendation. Like the CEO shouldn't be doing the grunt work, right? Your intellect shouldn't be doing all that. And when you try to, like it gets overworked, right? But when your heart gets practiced and, you know, you actually allow yourself to tap into that, it can then make good recommendations. And then the boss can just go, yep, this all looks good. Rubber stamp. The intellect can like send it off for processing, you know? But I think that's how all that fits in. But it's, as you say, it's allowing yourself to tap into your emotions, to become familiar with them, to give them the practice to do the job that they're actually supposed to do. And at the end of the day, they should be making a sound recommendation based on what all your senses are trying to tell you.
Like if we're constantly going to the CEO with all of this kind of pleb work, for lack of a better term, the CEO is going to get pissed off. It's like, why are you giving me this stuff? I got to do this other thing.
And in reverse, if you continually like make your intellectual CEO the strong arm kind of person where they micromanage everybody else and try to dominate, and I'm going to suppress these feelings and I'm going to suppress everything else and we're going to apply logic to it, the rest of the team's just going to be miserable, right?
I was going to say, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was great. Like we could do another whole episode about this, the sensual giftedness thing, the connection with emotional, because like just listening to you throughout this whole conversation, I thought about the people I've met over the past several years that they tune into experiences that are outside of what's considered typical. Some of them are considered like psychics. You know, they have the ability to receive information or engage with stuff that I don't. I mean, I don't have that ability. And yet I absolutely know people who clearly do take in information that I can't perceive. And not only with that label psychic, but also other ways that, I mean, these are people who are professionals, like they are not pathologized, and yet like they would be if they went to a psychiatrist and tried to explain these things to them. Like there's a lot here. There's so much that we don't understand. And it's gotten to a point in my life where when I come across somebody who's very confident in their beliefs and very, I don't know, rigid, I'm so turned off by that, because I'm like, wow, if you think you really know what's going on in some of these ways, like, it tells me a lot about you as a person.
Yeah, like I'm very much still figuring all of this out, and I've kind of come to accept that I'll probably forever be doing that. It just reminded me, so I have a PT, and if he listened to this, he'd get such an ego. But he's absolutely lovely, and he has this really kind, calm energy about him. And it's really because we kind of play jokes on each other, and like if we're both like chronically late all the time, and we'll kind of try and sneak up on each other and kind of like scare each other like as a joke. And it's really funny because whenever he tries to do it, I can sense him, and I just turn around and he's like, how do you do that? I said, I don't know. I know I can just sense you there. And like, I mean, you know, if I, like my personal bubble is like probably out to the street, to be honest, like like it's very big. And, you know, like if it was kind of random strangers, I'd sense them. I wouldn't know who it was, but when I'm kind of tuned into someone, I know. And it was so funny because one time there was this big banner and he was like standing behind it with his camera trying to like scare me. And I just was like, because I just knew it was there. But yeah, it's really funny. But yeah, some people would go, because I said to him, I tried to explain it to him, and he's pretty open-minded, but he's like, nah, like I don't believe it. I'm like, well, fine. If you don't want to believe me, that's fine. But that's my experience. So, and I guess reality is subjective. So I don't need other people to believe me necessarily.
That's right. Yeah, you're just listening to that. I'm like, oh, your spidey senses. I don't know what else. Like, obviously, that's what it is.
Yeah, because he was even saying, he's like, oh, maybe you can like smell, like, and it could be a sensory thing. Like I do get a lot of sensory information that I may not necessarily be 100% conscious of, but I receive it. But even he'll be ages away. I'll be like, I can't smell you from all the way over there necessarily. Although he does wear quite like potent, whatever deodorant. But even then, I don't think I can smell him from all the way over there. Anyway, this probably got weird.
It's okay. It's fine. It always gets a little weird, I think.
But isn't that the whole point of like everything that we're talking about with sensual giftedness is that things that seem weird to other people make sense to us, and it's not necessarily a pathology. Like all these weird experiences, different ways of being, different ways of thinking, different ways of sensing, they're different. Yeah, but they're not necessarily a bad thing.
And it's really interesting because when you're talking about the connection between the sensual and the emotional, is when I went to have my intergifted assessment, I thought that my sensual experiences were actually my emotional giftedness, but it wasn't. It was the sensory giftedness, because I didn't realize that people didn't have this experience where they can kind of tap into other people's emotional states. But then obviously the emotional giftedness is the interpretation. You get the data, but then you have to, So that was really interesting for me.
Again, we get the importance of doing things like the podcast and mirroring and stuff, because if nobody talks about this shit, we'd think it's just us.
Yeah, definitely. So I think like recently I've seen a few people kind of talking about this stuff on some of the like the different like gifted forums and things like that. So my brain gets a bit confused when there's lots of people talking. So I usually just DM them and be like, hey, do you want to talk about this? Because like I'm quite interested about it. But actually I'm curious. Are there any like resources or anything? This is for me as well, but maybe for listeners, like, are there any like resources or books or anything about these sorts of experiences?
Michael's book is the only thing that comes to mind. I mean, Michael's book, Mellow Out, is a great place to learn more about the 5 overexcitabilities and their application, in the gifted, and even these atypical experiences or like super sensual or whatever are in his book. So that's one place that I would recommend.
But that's, I think, a good note as any to wrap up on, because we actually have to jump into a recording with Caitlin's podcast next. So, Caitlin, thank you for coming on our podcast. It's been wonderful to talk to you about this stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And Chris, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you both. Yes, it was always a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners. We always appreciate you too. In this episode, we're talking to Caitlin Hughes from the fuck me.
And I was like, well, what's that? That's like the twice exceptional tree. But no, I'm like, but yeah, anyway, just don't include any of that shit. But I have to do my like side thoughts.
You mentioned Tina, and if you leave that part out, this isn't going to make sense. So you might have to take this part out too. But yeah, I
ain't leaving out shit. It's all going in. My head just blew up.
Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, my head just blew up.
Totally. Oh my gosh. I'm having one of those moments where I feel like I'm having like a log jam or something, or a bottleneck of thoughts in my head, because these things kind of conspired to keep me from having a level of self-awareness.
And we also have that weird quirk of sometimes going up at the end of the sentences. So it always sounds like you're kind of asking a question when really maybe you're not.
There is a lot. And I don't know if any of that really made sense, but hopefully.
So yeah, I think, I don't know where I'm going with this now, but
that we're talking about with positive disintegration and sensual giftedness is sensual giftedness.
Them, whoever, we're not going to assume that the CEO is a man. That was really gross. Maybe we should cut that one. Cut. I don't care. You can leave it in.
But they hit like this sweet spot between about season 3 and maybe season 10. And it's like, you've given up
that's
now.
That's when we had Mr. Sparkle.
Yeah, and that's when we had Mr. Sparkle. Anywho, shall we get on with it? Continue your path to authenticity through the links in the show notes. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter for stacks of cool things delivered straight to your inbox. Explore the Dabrowski Centre, email us, or join us on social media. And don't forget to show your love by liking, subscribing, grabbing some positive disintegration merch, or leaving us a rating or review on your podcast platform.